The L train screeched as it rounded the curve toward 47th Street, sending sparks into the night like scattered fireflies. Naomi Carter sat quietly inside a nearly empty car, her chin resting on the collar of her thrifted coat. The cold metal beneath her hands reminded her of how real everything was, how raw, how unfinished. But also, in some quiet way, it is full of possibilities. South Side, Chicago, wasn't where people visited unless they had to. The cracked sidewalks, flickering streetlights, and weary brick buildings whispered stories of survival and scraped together dreams. Naomi didn't just live here. She learned here, fought here, built herself here, piece by fragile piece. At 24, she wore the fatigue of someone older, yet carried herself with the quiet elegance of someone who hadn't let life dim her spirit. Each night, she scrubbed the hallways of glass towers in downtown Chicago, offices that smelled of imported espresso and ambition, before heading home to a cramped one-bedroom she called her own. It wasn't much, but it was paid for in full. Every corner was scrubbed, and her own two hands handled every bill. By day, when her eyelids could bear to stay open, Naomi sketched. On the back of receipts, on napkins, on dollar store notebooks. Charcoal smudges lived under her fingernails more often than soap. Her art wasn't just a hobby. It was her refuge. Her voice was heard when no one listened. Once, during a break at the janitorial closet of Whitmore Tower, her supervisor caught her shading the curve of a cheekbone on a half-finished portrait. "You got talent," he muttered, more curious than cruel. "But talent doesn't pay rent. Mops do." Naomi had smiled politely, but her fingers didn't stop moving. Miles away, in a world that seemed cut from finer cloth, Lucas Whitmore adjusted the cufflinks of his tailored shirt as he stared out over the city skyline. From the penthouse floor of the same tower Naomi cleaned each night, Lucas watched the lights flicker like stars under glass. 36 years old, master of mergers and acquisitions, builder of empires. Yet something in him remained restless. Empty. His success had been forged in discipline, sharpened by loss, and wrapped in marble and glass. He hadn't had time for softness, for poetry, for feeling. Those things had been boxed up the day his father died, and his mother handed him the keys to the empire, along with a warning: don't be sentimental. Sentiment costs money. Lucas obeyed, and somewhere along the way, the man beneath the suit began to fade. Neither knew their separate lives, one born of survival, the other of legacy, were already bending toward a collision neither saw coming. She had never heard his name. He had never seen her face. And yet, the storm would find them both. Because the thing about fate is, it doesn't knock. It crashes in, soaked in rain and laced in lightning. And when it does, all your rules, routines, rigid self-control vanish, like fog on a train window. What would happen when a girl from the South Side with calloused hands met a man who hadn't touched vulnerability in years? That story begins right here. And if you've ever wondered whether two people from opposite worlds could rewrite their destinies together, stay with us. Leave us a comment. What's the most immense difference love has helped you overcome? Tap that like button if you believe even the quietest lives can hold the loudest love stories. And follow for the next chapter. Because trust me, you won't want to miss the coming storm. Next, a storm rolls in, and so does fate. The morning after her night shift always brought a stillness that Naomi welcomed and feared. The city outside her apartment was beginning to stir. Buses exhaling diesel breath, radios humming through cracked windows, children laughing in narrow hallways as they chased one another on their way to school. But inside, Naomi's world was quieter. She moved like a ghost through her routine, removing her gray uniform with care, folding it over the back of a chair before stepping into the steam of her shower. Water slid down her back, taking with it the dust of boardrooms and marble floors that had never once acknowledged her presence. She watched it swirl down the drain, as if it could carry her exhaustion with it, but no amount of scrubbing could reach the ache that had settled in her chest. She stood there longer than necessary, not for the warmth, but for the silence. After dressing in her favorite oversized sweater and the soft leggings she saved for days off, Naomi sat by the window with a chipped mug of cinnamon tea. Her sketchpad was already open, its cover worn, its edges curled like old parchment. She didn't need to think. Her hand found its rhythm, as if guided by instinct alone. The face she began to draw was one she saw every day but barely remembered. Her mother's. A soft chin, eyes shaped like rain clouds, a smile she only saw in memories that blurred at the edges. Naomi had been 12 the last time she heard that voice say her name. Her mother had kissed her forehead, handed her a backpack, and told her it would only be for a few days. A distant cousin, some court paperwork, nothing to worry about. But the few days had become weeks, then years. Letters stopped arriving. Phone numbers stopped working. Naomi had aged out of the system without family, photos, or answers. What she had, though, was a strange resilience, a silent, stubborn will to survive. Foster homes taught her to disappear and sand miles politely while treading water inside. She learned how to earn silence with good behavior and fold herself smaller so she didn't take up space she wasn't offered. And when the system finally let her go, Naomi walked out with a garbage bag full of clothes and a heart lined with invisible bruises. But she had art. She always had art. When she was 16, a social worker noticed her sketches and brought her a box of pastels. "For the days you can't say out loud what you're feeling," the woman said. Naomi hadn't spoken a word for 3 days after that. She didn't need to. She painted instead. Her dream of art school still lived in a drawer under her bed. A college acceptance letter, yellowed and unread by anyone but her, next to a tuition estimate that could have bought a used car. It wasn't just money. It was time, energy, breath, things she couldn't afford to give away when rent was due and her bones were tired. Still, sometimes, like today, she let herself imagine. In another part of the city, Lucas Whitmore stood in front of a mirror that didn't lie, but never told the whole truth. He wore a navy suit with hand-stitched lapels and a silver tie knotted to perfection. His hair, though naturally tousled, had been trained to behave. Everything about him looked right. But inside, Lucas felt like an echo. He moved through his morning like a machine, a protein shake, a news briefing, a video call with a hedge fund in Singapore. Long ago, he learned how to calculate his words, read silence in boardrooms, and fold people into yeses without raising his voice. Success had never been his problem. What he struggled with, quietly, constantly, was the cost of it. The more he won, the more he lost. Time, relationships, himself. Lucas hadn't written poetry in 15 years. Not since his father's death had grief turned into currency. The boy who used to hide sonnets under his mattress was now the man who signed 7-figure acquisitions over breakfast and forgot what it felt like to sit in stillness. Even his mother, Eleanor Whitmore, steel-haired and sharper than most men in any room, had noticed. "You used to dream out loud," she said over dinner one night. "Now you only strategize in silence." Lucas hadn't answered. He had only raised his wine glass in a quiet toast to the truth. He lived in a world of clarity and consequence, contracts, margins, metrics. And yet, sometimes, in the quietest moments, When the city lights blurred into rivers of gold, he would feel the shape of something missing, something soft, something real. He didn't know her yet, but somewhere across the city, in a small apartment scented with tea and worn pages, Naomi was sketching her pain into beauty. And maybe the storm was already gathering to bring their two quiet worlds into collision. Not with drama, but with truth. The kind that starts in silence and ends in transformation. Chicago never wept gently. When the storm arrived, it came not as a soft drizzle, but as a tempest. Sheets of rain whipping down the sides of high-rises. Thunder cracking through the sky like the city was being split in two. Traffic snarled in the dark, wind bending streetlights into crooked angles, and even the pigeons that usually scattered the sidewalks had vanished. It was a night that pressed against windows and found its way into bones. Naomi Carter stood just inside the revolving glass door of Whitmore Tower, her thin jacket already damp at the shoulders. She had stayed late, again, covering for another cleaner who'd called out with a sick child. It wasn't just kindness. The overtime pay meant she might afford new sketch paper next week, not just dig through recycled backs of meeting agendas, but now she regretted staying. The sky had collapsed into chaos. Miguel, the night security guard, stood beside the elevator bank, holding a mop with mild disdain. "You sure you want to go out in that?" Naomi glanced at the storm raging beyond the glass and exhaled. "My apartment's not walking distance from me." Miguel frowned, then turned toward a nearby shelf and rummaged through a box labeled "Lost and Found." He retrieved a large black umbrella with a slight bend in its handle from it. "No one's claimed this in months. Might as well do someone some good tonight." She accepted it with a grateful nod. "You're a lifesaver, Miguel. More like a storm dodger. Be safe." Outside, the rain hit with brutal insistence. Naomi stepped into it like one might enter a battlefield, steady, braced, and knowing there was no easy way out. The umbrella strained in the wind, its ribs creaking under pressure, and she held it low over her head as she moved. A gust lifted the umbrella like paper 3 blocks later, flipping it inside out with a sudden mocking snap. She cursed softly, folding it under her arm, and ducked into the awning of a closed cafe. Her clothes clung to her skin, soaked clean through, and the cold bit with tiny teeth up her spine. She checked her phone. No signal. Just the cracked map of streets and a blinking battery. 6 more blocks. Then the subway. Then home. She could make it. She stepped back out into the street, head down against the rain. The sidewalks had become rivers. Trash floated in swirling eddies. Her shoes were soaked through, squelching with each step. She didn't see the car until it hit the puddle. Water, icy, dirty, and utterly merciless, splashed over her with the force of a slap. She froze, stunned, dripping. A sharp breath hissed from her lips. Perfect. Perfect. The car's brake lights flared red. Then, to her astonishment, it reversed. The window rolled down. "Are you all right?" The voice was low, steady. A man's voice, refined but not distant. Concerned. Naomi squinted into the headlights, shielding her eyes. She was about to snap, to release every bitter word on the tip of her tongue, but then the lightning struck again, lighting his face. Strong jawline, rain-slicked hair, eyes that didn't pity her, but genuinely waited for an answer. "I'm fine," she said stiffly, brushing wet strands from her cheeks. "Just wetter than I already was." "Let me give you a ride," he offered, his tone quiet but firm. "You're freezing, and that storm isn't letting up." Her entire upbringing screamed against it. Don't get in cars with strangers, especially not rich ones with expensive cars and vague intentions. But another gust of wind nearly knocked her sideways. Fine, she muttered, teeth chattering, and moved toward the passenger door. Inside, the warm air smelled faintly of leather and something crisp, maybe cedar. Her soaked clothes made contact with the immaculate seats, and she flinched. "I'm soaking your car," she said quickly, voice muffled in embarrassment. "It'll dry," he replied, glancing at her as he eased the car forward. "Where to?" She hesitated. Giving him her exact address felt like too much. "Near 81st and Drexel." He nodded, tapping the location into the console with one hand. "I'm Naomi," she offered, after a silence that stretched too far. He looked at her briefly. "Lucas." No last names. No small talk. Still, something in his glance lingered. As they drove through the flooded streets, Naomi watched him from the corner of her eye. The way he gripped the wheel, not too tightly, but like he was always in control. The glint of his watch, the steadiness in his jaw. His clothes were tailored, even under the black coat he'd thrown on. Expensive, but not showy. "You work at Whitmore?" he asked casually, nodding toward the logo on her jacket. "I clean it," she replied, unbothered. "Night shift." Something flickered across his face. Not mockery. Curiosity, maybe. "I work there too," he said, his eyes never leaving the road. Of course he did. Their worlds existed in the same building, but not the same dimension. She scrubbed floors. Whatever he did, it involved corner offices and power ties. As they neared her block, the streets narrowed, lined with two-story apartment buildings, some with boarded-up windows. Floodwaters sloshed around the tires, rising rapidly. "That's your building?" he asked, nodding toward the one with peeling bricks and flickering hallway lights. "Yeah." His brows drew together. "The basement's going to flood, if it hasn't already." Almost as if to confirm, a transformer sparked nearby, bursting into blue flame. A section of the street went dark. She heard shouting and saw emergency lights flicker. "Do you have anywhere else to go tonight?" he asked, suddenly urgent. "Friends? Family?" "No," she said quietly, then added, "I'll figure it out." He looked at her then, not just glanced, but honestly looked like someone weighing something deeper than logistics. "I have a guest room," he said. "It's warm, it's dry, and you'd be safe there." She stared at him. The storm raged outside. Her phone was dead. Her apartment was one bad hour away from being unlivable. And she had no one else. "Why?" she asked, voice nearly lost in the sound of rain. "Why would you help me?" Lucas turned back to the windshield, then said, almost as if to himself, "Because I can. And because no one should have to battle a storm alone." She was silent, then nodded once. "Okay." He didn't smile, but something in his posture shifted, less guarded. As the car pulled away from her block, Naomi looked back through the rain-smeared window. Her street was already a river. Her world, in some quiet way, had just begun to change, and she had no idea how much more the storm would take and give. The elevator doors whispered open into a space so quiet, it felt like the air was holding its breath. Naomi stepped in cautiously, water still dripping from her sleeves, her damp shoes making soft sounds against the polished floor. The elevator's interior wasn't like the ones she rode at Whitmore Tower during her cleaning shifts. This one was sleek, silent, and private. There were no buttons, just a keycard panel and a soft blue screen lit up with Lucas's touch. It moved without a sound. She tried not to fidget. Lucas stood beside her, still in his black coat, his profile illuminated by the soft glow of the ceiling lights. He didn't speak, and neither did she. But the silence didn't feel cold. It felt suspended like a string drawn tight between 2 points, unsure if it would snap or hold. When the elevator opened again, it did so directly into his home. For a moment, Naomi didn't step out. The space that unfolded before her was breathtaking, not in a grand, ostentatious way, but in the careful quietness of it. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the storm, turning rain into a silver curtain worldwide. Warm wooden floors, contrasted with steel fixtures. Shelves lined with books, not for decoration, but to be read. Artwork hung thoughtfully, not just for price, but for soul. It felt lived in and not staged, not cold. "This way," Lucas said softly, guiding her past the open kitchen, clean but not sterile, with a bottle of olive oil left near the stove and a half-folded newspaper on the counter. He opened a door to a guest suite, flipping on a light. The room was softly lit, the bed neatly made, and a plush robe folded across its edge. The ensuite bathroom gleamed, marble, glass, and more kinds of soaps and lotions than Naomi had ever seen in one place. "There's a towel, hairdryer, anything you need," he said, setting a clean t-shirt and drawstring pants on the bed. "They might be big, but they're dry." She stood in the doorway, hands at her sides, unsure where to place herself. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything." He nodded once. "Take your time. I'll make us something to eat." And just like that, he disappeared into the hallway, leaving her with the faint scent of cedarwood and unfamiliar softness. Naomi sat slowly on the edge of the bed. The mattress didn't creak. The sheets smelled like lavender. It was the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but kind. A hush she'd never known before. She stepped into the bathroom, peeling off her soaked layers one by one, steam already beginning to fog the mirror. Initially, the water was too hot, but she didn't turn it down. She let it burn the chill from her skin, from her fingers, from the knot lodged somewhere deep between her shoulder blades. She stood under it until her legs trembled, until the thoughts in her head quieted to a murmur. It felt absurdly luxurious when she stepped out and wrapped herself in the robe. The fabric clung softly to her skin, still pink from the heat. She pulled on the clothes he'd left, the shirt so large it hung off one shoulder, the sweatpants needing to be tied twice to stay up. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, unfamiliar, barefaced, wrapped in someone else's life for the night. And for once, she didn't look like a girl trying to prove anything. Just someone human. Following the scent of garlic and warmth, she padded barefoot through the corridor, careful not to make noise, even though the penthouse seemed to welcome her steps. Lucas stood at the stove, stirring something in a saucepan. He'd changed too, into a dark t-shirt and soft joggers, somehow still managing to look like he belonged in a magazine spread. But something about him felt different now, looser around the edges, less executive, more man. "Feel better?" he asked without turning around. "Much," Naomi replied, wrapping her arms around herself. "I was starting to think I'd never feel my toes again." He glanced over his shoulder, a faint smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. "Pasta okay?" She blinked. "You cook?" "Only 3 things," he admitted, stirring. 2 of them badly. Pasta's my only reliable skill." Naomi's laugh was soft but genuine. "I'm impressed." He gestured toward the island. "There's wine if you want some." She nodded, settling onto the bar stool. The glass he poured was deep red, rich, and fragrant. She took a sip, letting it warm her from the inside out. Across the counter, he plated the pasta delicately, but not pretentiously, just enough garlic and a sprinkle of herbs. "I'm not sure what to say," she murmured. About what? This. She looked around the space. The wine. The man standing across from her, who didn't seem the least bit inconvenienced by the fact that she had appeared in his world by accident. All of it. He leaned on the counter, his gaze meeting hers. It's just dinner. She tilted her head slightly. And the storm? And the guest room? The ride? That's dinner too? He was quiet for a beat. No, he admitted. But none of it was out of obligation. I don't do things I don't want to do. There was a truth in his tone that left no room for suspicion. They ate in near silence, interrupted only by clinks of forks and the occasional sound of thunder outside. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that asked no questions and made room for presence. Halfway through the meal, Naomi set down her fork and looked up. I know who you are. Lucas looked at her without surprise. The valet said your name, she explained, and I've seen your portrait in the lobby more times than I can count. I've emptied the trash bins outside your boardroom. I mopped the hallway outside your office. He nodded, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his eyes. Fair enough. You didn't have to stop your car, she said. You didn't have to offer a room, pasta, or clothes. I know. She looked down at her glass, swirling the last of the wine. I just don't understand why. Lucas's voice was calm. You were standing in the rain and looked like you hadn't asked for help in a long time. Naomi didn't speak, didn't move. Sometimes, he continued, it's not about understanding. It's about showing up, without needing a reason. She stared at him for a moment, then nodded once. The thunder rolled closer, shaking the windows, but inside, the storm had calmed at least, for now, and somewhere between the clink of a wine glass and the soft hush of breathing, two strangers sat quietly in the same silence, for the first time in years, without needing to run. The rain hadn't stopped. Outside the vast expanse of glass, the city seemed to dissolve. Lights melting into fog, streets blurred beneath pooling water, shadows turning soft at the edges. Thunder rumbled again, low and unhurried, like a heart murmuring in its sleep. Inside the penthouse, it was warm, quiet. Lucas and Naomi moved to the living room, their wine glasses only half full, their conversations softening like the storm beyond the windows. The city no longer pressed between them the way it had earlier. Titles and uniforms had been left behind somewhere between the guest room door and the first sip of wine. Naomi curled her legs beneath her on the edge of the sofa. The oversized t-shirt slipped slightly off one shoulder, the fabric soft against her skin. Her hair, still damp, fell in loose waves over her collarbone. She wasn't trying to look like anything. That startled Lucas the most. How rare it was to see someone simply being. You look different, he said before he could think better of it. She raised an eyebrow. Then what? Then everyone I usually end up sitting across from. Naomi let out a quiet breath. Let me guess. Blazers, perfect lipstick, and an eye on your bank account? Lucas smiled faintly. More or less. And what about you? She asked. What do they see when they look at you? He hesitated. An opportunity, a stepping stone, an investment. Naomi tilted her head. And what don't they see? It was the kind of question he was rarely asked, and seldom ready to answer. My edges, he said after a long pause. The parts that don't fit into a press release. She watched him closely, her gaze not cutting, but careful. Like what? He leaned back slightly, resting an arm along the top of the couch, eyes drifting toward the rain-slicked glass. I was 23 when my father died. Suddenly. Stroke. His voice was even, but something behind it flickered, like a light bulb just before it dims. He built the company, but never trusted I could carry it. My mother called the board meeting 2 days after the funeral, told them I'd be assuming control. Naomi said nothing. I spent the next 5 years working 18-hour days, trying to be the man they thought he was. Were you? No, he said, but I became the man they needed anyway. And what did that cost you? Lucas turned his head slowly and met her gaze. I don't know yet. I think I'm still counting. For a moment, the only sound was the soft tick of the clock above the bookshelf and the patter of rain against the glass. Then Naomi spoke, her voice quieter. My mom left when I was 12, she said. Said she had to go find herself. I thought she'd be back in a week. I packed a bag with just enough clothes for a weekend. Left it by the door. It stayed there for almost a year. Lucas didn't interrupt. They moved me through 4 homes before I turned 18. You get good at folding. Folding your clothes, folding your words, folding your feelings. He looked at her, not with pity, but with something slower, more profound. Respect, maybe. Recognition. I didn't expect this, she admitted. You, this night, any of it. Neither did I. Another silence stretched between them, but it no longer felt like a pause. It felt like a breath. Naomi set her wine glass down, then asked, almost playfully, So, is this your usual Friday night? Lucas chuckled under his breath. Usually. I'm reviewing contracts, fielding calls from Singapore, and wondering how many days I've gone without speaking to someone who doesn't work for me. She smirked. Sounds thrilling. It's effective, he replied, but not particularly human. Naomi studied him a moment, then leaned her chin into her hand. You're different when you're not wearing a suit. How so? Less polished, she said. More like someone who once wrote poetry. Lucas froze. The words hit like a pin dropped in a silent room. How did you... You have poetry books on the shelf, she said. Dog-eared. Marked. No one keeps Neruda and Angelou unless they've been read. His mouth curved, not into a smile, but something quieter. I haven't written a line in years. Why not? He shrugged. What's the return on a metaphor? Naomi's expression softened. Some things are worth doing even if they don't scale. Lucas oversaw her, the way her voice held conviction without needing volume, the way her presence filled the space without demanding it. I think, he said slowly, that might be the most valuable sentence I've heard in a long time. He stood, took their empty glasses to the sink, then turned back toward her. I have a question. Okay. When you stood outside in the rain, why didn't you run? Why didn't you scream, cry, or bang on a stranger's door? Naomi's lips parted slightly, but it took a moment for her to answer. Because I've done all those things before, she said, and they didn't make me any less cold. The answer settled into the room with the weight of something that didn't need elaboration. Lucas stepped closer, slowly. I'd like to kiss you, he said, his voice lower now. Measured, but only if you want me to. Naomi didn't look away. Her heart thudded in her chest, not in fear, but in the hush that comes before something irreversible. She didn't speak. Instead, she reached up and gently placed her fingers against the side of his jaw. That was answer enough. His lips met hers, not urgently, not with desperation, but with a kind of reverence. Like he wasn't trying to take, but to learn. The kiss was unhurried, exploratory. His hand came to rest lightly against her waist, her fingers slipping into the collar of his shirt. She hadn't meant for it to happen, but in that moment, the world beyond the windows disappeared. There was only breath. only warmth, and the faint taste of red wine and unraveling. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his, eyes closed. "I don't usually do this," she whispered. "Neither do I," he replied. And neither knew, without saying it, that nothing about this night had followed the usual rules. And that was the most dangerous part of all. The city had quieted. The thunder retreated somewhere beyond the skyline, leaving only the steady whisper of rain against glass. The lights of Chicago shimmered through the windows, softened by mist, casting a silver-blue hue across the room. Everything felt slowed, suspended, as though time had taken a breath and stopped moving forward. Naomi stood still for a long moment after the kiss, eyes half-lidded, her fingers resting near Lucas's collarbone. His warmth lingered, not just on her skin, but somewhere more resounding, an echo in her chest that hadn't quite found its rhythm again. Lucas was watching her. Not in that way. Some men watched women while trying to decipher intent or advantage. He looked at her like someone trying to memorize the shape of a moment, afraid it might dissolve if he blinked. Naomi stepped back slowly, her voice soft. "That was—" Lucas tilted his head slightly. "Too much?" She shook her head. "No, just unexpected." He nodded, as if he understood more than she said. "I should probably sleep," she said gently, her tone not quite a goodbye, but not quite a continuation. "Of course," he replied, stepping aside, giving her space. His hand remained relaxed at his side, though his jaw tightened subtly, like he was restraining some part of himself from asking her to stay. Naomi turned toward the guest room, her bare feet making no sound against the wood floor. But before she crossed the threshold, she paused. Her fingers hovered near the doorframe. She didn't turn around. "I haven't," she said softly. Lucas glanced toward her. "Haven't what?" She looked over her shoulder, and her gaze didn't waver this time. "I've never slept with anyone." A silence fell. Not awkward, not alarmed, but deep, weighty. Lucas didn't move, didn't speak for a long beat. Then he stepped closer, only close enough that his voice could reach her without raising. "Thank you," he said. Naomi blinked. "For what?" "For trusting me enough to say that." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. There was no judgment in his voice, no curiosity, just acknowledgement. "I didn't tell you because I thought it should stop something," she said. "I told you because I want it to be real if it doesn't stop something. Chosen, not assumed." Lucas's expression softened. "You get to choose every part of this, always." She studied him, this man who could command a boardroom with a glance, but in this moment stood utterly still, careful not to take more than he was given. Naomi stepped away from the door. Lucas didn't move. She reached for his hand, fingers curling lightly around his. Then, without a word, she led him toward the guest suite. The light in the room was low, warm, amber, casting long shadows along the edges of the walls. Naomi didn't rush. She didn't pose. She moved with the quiet grace of someone deciding within, not for anyone else. Lucas stopped at the edge of the bed, his hand lifted, slow and unsure, to brush a damp curl from her cheek. "Are you sure?" he asked, and there was something rough in his voice now, something held back with effort. Naomi answered by placing his palm against her heart. "Nothing about tonight is a mistake," she whispered. He kissed her again, then, not with caution, but with reverence, as though she were something sacred, as though she were something he hadn't expected to find, and he didn't quite believe he was allowed to hold. The moment deepened. Breath tangled with breath. Fingers traced skin, as if learning it like Braille. Lucas moved with an awareness of her inexperience, not timid, but patient. And Naomi, despite the unfamiliarity, felt none of the fear she always thought would come with firsts. Instead, there was something else. A slow, unfolding heat. A tremble that wasn't uncertainty, but anticipation. Her body, once always tense from working, from waiting, from enduring, now responded without fear. She met him, kiss for kiss, breath for breath, a rhythm building between them that felt like something ancient rediscovered. When he finally moved above her, when their bodies met, careful, breathless, Naomi gasped, not from pain, but from the overwhelming sense of being seen, entirely, not just touched, but known. And Lucas, too, seemed transformed. All the control, all the precise detachment he usually carried fell away. Here, in this room, he wasn't the CEO, wasn't heir, wasn't a figurehead. He was just a man who had forgotten what it meant to feel something, and had now found it again in the curve of a woman's shoulder, the trust in her breath, the heat of her hands against his back. Their movements were slow at first, delicate, reverent, then deeper, wilder. It was as if this storm had called forth something ancient in both of them. And when it ended, when they lay tangled in sheets that smelled of lavender, sweat, and something too tender to name, they said nothing, because the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of breath, of heat, of a beginning. Naomi nestled closer, her fingers resting just above his heart. Lucas kissed the top of her head, arms circling her like he wasn't sure how to let go. She didn't fall asleep right away. Neither did he. Outside, the storm rolled on, more softly now, as though satisfied with what it had delivered. And in the quiet hours before dawn, two people who hadn't meant to collide found themselves caught in something neither could quite define. But neither one of them, just yet, wanted to walk away. The rain had stopped. Sometime between the hush of their final whispered words and the slow drift into sleep, the storm had loosened its grip on the city. Now, morning light filtered gently through the tall windows, gold and quiet, brushing over tangled sheets and bare skin like an unseen hand tracing the contours of a moment too delicate to disturb. Naomi stirred first. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was. The room was too spacious, and the silence was too complete. The linens were too soft beneath her fingertips, and the arm draped across her waist, firm, warm, possessive even in sleep, was not part of any dream. She turned her head slightly. Lucas lay beside her, one hand resting lightly against her hip, his breath even, his features relaxed in a way she hadn't seen before. Without the tension he usually wore like armor, he looked almost boyish. The frown line between his brows was smoothed out, his lips slightly parted. He looked human, beautifully, vulnerably human. Naomi didn't move. She only watched, her heart quieter than usual, but fuller somehow. Something inside her had found a rhythm she didn't know it needed. And yet, even in the stillness, thoughts gathered like fog. What now? She had slept with the CEO of a company for which she cleaned offices. She had spent the night not just in his penthouse, but in his arms. No contracts, no promises, just warmth, just tenderness, just real. She should have felt exposed, or awkward, or afraid, but instead, she felt known. It was as though someone had looked at her and seen her for the first time in a very long while. Naomi exhaled softly and began to slide gently from beneath the sheets. Lucas shifted slightly but didn't wake. She wrapped the robe around her body and padded barefoot into the kitchen, drawn by the scent of freshly brewed coffee. She hadn't expected it. Maria, the housekeeper, whom Naomi hadn't seen the night before, was creeping through the kitchen, placing a set of cups on the counter. A woman in her 50s, composed and graceful, with elegance born not of wealth, but of certainty. She looked up, unsurprised by Naomi's presence. "Good morning," she said. Not with warmth exactly, but not with coldness either. Professional, as if this situation, however unexpected, was not hers to judge. "Morning," Naomi replied softly. Maria gestured toward the French press. "Fresh. He always drinks it black." Naomi poured herself a cup and nodded. "Thanks. I'll prepare breakfast," Maria added. "Nothing too heavy." Naomi nodded again, unsure of what else to say. But Maria had already turned away, moving with quiet precision, as though she had known how to make space for moments that didn't belong to her for years. Naomi stepped out onto the terrace. The air was clean and crisp. Below, the city sparkled in the early light, washed fresh by the storm. For a moment, it didn't feel like the same place she had walked through the night before. Soaked to the skin, shivering, alone. Behind her, the sliding glass door opened with a soft sound. Lucas stepped out barefoot, dressed in dark lounge pants and a simple long-sleeved shirt. His hair was tousled, his jaw shadowed in stubble. He looked like a man with nothing to prove and nowhere to be. "I didn't mean to wake you," Naomi said quietly. "You didn't," he replied. "The bed just got colder." She smiled, only faintly. He came to stand beside her, both of them looking out at the city, not speaking for a long while. "I used to watch the skyline every morning," he said, "back when I thought it meant something. Power, accomplishment, all that. And now? Now it just looks like a bunch of windows reflecting everything I've tried to hide." Naomi turned her head, studying him in profile. "What are you hiding?" He looked at her, then looked. "That I don't know what I want. Or maybe I do. And I'm terrified it'll slip through my fingers." Naomi didn't speak. Her fingers curled around the warm ceramic of her cup. He continued, quieter. "Last night wasn't just about the storm or desire. You know that, right?" She nodded slowly. "I know." Lucas reached up and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And you? You're not just anyone." Naomi let the words settle between them, like dust in sunlight. "I need to check on my apartment," she said after a long pause. "There might be damage. I should see what's left." Lucas's hand dropped to his side. "Of course. Let me send someone with you. I can call building management, get a contractor to—" "No," she interrupted gently. "I need to handle it myself. I need to go back. Just for a little while." He looked at her, a faint edge of concern softening his jaw. "Why?" Naomi met his gaze evenly. "Because, as much as I want to stay in this moment, I need to know that I'm not just stepping into your world because it's easier. I must remember who I was yesterday, before you pulled over." Lucas didn't argue. He only nodded, slow and reluctant. "Will you come back?" he asked. Naomi hesitated. "I don't know yet," she admitted, and the honesty in her voice made his throat tighten. "But I want to." He stepped closer, brushing his lips lightly against her forehead. "I'll be here," he said quietly. And for a man who had built his life on control and strategy, it was perhaps the most vulnerable promise he had ever made. Later that morning, as Naomi left the penthouse wearing borrowed clothes and carrying last night's truth like a secret folded against her skin, she knew the city had changed. Not in its streets or buildings, but in the way one man had opened a door, and hadn't asked her to become anything but who she already was. A woman who had weathered the storm, and now had to choose which direction to walk in next. The hallway smelled of mildew. Naomi stood outside her apartment door, the carpet beneath her feet still damp, the air heavy with the faint, musty scent of water damage. The storm had left its signature on everything. Walls darkened at the baseboards, faint cracks blooming like bruises along the ceiling, and a low, consistent drip echoing somewhere down the hall, rhythmic and indifferent. She turned her key and stepped inside. It took a moment for her eyes to adjust. The curtains were still drawn, the room dim. Everything looked the same, but quieter, somehow. Like the apartment had been breathing, waiting for her to return. She moved slowly, not because she was afraid, but because something inside her needed the stillness. Her shoes left faint, wet prints on the wood floors as she crossed into the living space. A thin line of water had seeped beneath the door and spread into the corners, curling the edges of old books left near the windowsill. Her sketch pad, left on the coffee table, was damp at the corners. She picked it up gently and flipped through the pages. Most were intact, but the ink had bled in a few places, lines softening, becoming blurry, like memories you try too hard to hold on to. She pressed her hand over one of the portraits, an unfinished self-portrait, eyes shaded in charcoal, mouth unresolved. She had drawn it weeks ago, late at night, when the silence of the city outside felt heavier than usual. She didn't know then that one night could tilt her world. She didn't know how quickly one look, one unexpected act of tenderness, could fold into her. She let out a slow breath and set the sketchpad aside. The bedroom was untouched. A few clothes lay where she'd left them. Her suitcase sat in the corner, still half-packed from the night before. She hadn't unpacked her life because, somewhere deep down, she didn't expect anything to change. Survival doesn't make room for planning. It simply exists. But now she wasn't sure where she belonged. She ran a hand through her curls and moved to the tiny kitchenette, opening the fridge more out of habit than hunger. The light flickered to life. Inside, a few containers, half a bottle of orange juice, some takeout she'd forgotten to throw away. The normalcy of it felt foreign. Was this her life, still? Or was it only one version of it? The one she had survived, not chosen? She pulled out a water bottle, took a slow sip, and sat at the kitchen table. Outside the window, the sun had come out, glinting off the puddles in the alley below. Children's voices carried from a neighboring courtyard. Shouts, laughter, the sound of a basketball bouncing on concrete. Life, continuing. Naomi turned her phone over in her hand. No missed calls. No new messages. Lucas hadn't reached out, just as he said he wouldn't. He had given her space. But it wasn't distance she feared. It was everything that came with the closeness. For a long time, she had lived in the certainty of being unseen. Invisible, yes, but also untouchable. That kind of solitude forms a sort of armor. The kind that doesn't rust, but hardens. It makes the world manageable, predictable. And now she had let someone in. She had let someone touch her, not just with his hands, but with his words, attention, and presence. She had seen him stripped of the polished narrative the world clung to. Lucas Whitmore, powerful, controlled, always ahead of the game. But in the quiet hours of the night, he was just a man, unsure, searching, scared of losing what he didn't even know he wanted. She knew that version of him now, and that knowledge was its kind of intimacy. That afternoon, Naomi sorted through what was salvageable. She pulled damp clothes from the closet, placed a few pieces of artwork out to dry, and threw away the spoiled contents of her fridge. She called the building manager and was told the usual. Insurance assessments were underway, but repairs could take weeks. The bottom 2 floors had flooded. Electricity would be inconsistent. She didn't think of fear in the late afternoon as she stepped into a hot shower, or even confusion. She thought only of stillness, of all the things that had cracked open inside her, and how none of them could be stuffed back where they came from. When she stepped out, wrapped in her towel in her own home, the weight of the borrowed robe still clung to her skin, not physically, but emotionally. She sat at her small desk by the window and opened a fresh page in her sketchbook. Her hand moved instinctively, charcoal gliding across the paper in strokes that felt sharper, more deliberate than usual. She didn't draw herself this time, or the skyline, or memories of old pain. She drew him. Not the version from magazine covers or boardroom headlines, but the version from last night. The one with bare feet and rain-damp hair. The one who looked at her like silence could be shared, not just endured. His eyes weren't perfect in the sketch, but they held something true, something tentative, something real. When she set the pencil down, dusk had folded gently over the city. The lights had come on again, street lamps flickering into life, windows glowing gold behind sheer curtains. It was a soft kind of night. Her phone buzzed. A single message. "Lucas, are you okay?" She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she typed slowly, "Naomi, I'm okay, just remembering how to breathe on my own." There was no reply for several minutes. She didn't need one. But eventually, his message came. "Lucas, I'll be here, whether you remember or forget." She set the phone down beside her sketchbook, and she didn't feel like she was standing between two lives for the first time since the rain began. She felt, if only faintly, that she was beginning to shape one of her own. A life not built from survival, but from choice. 3 days passed, not with fireworks or dramatic gestures, but with a quiet kind of clarity. Naomi stayed in her apartment, alone, not because she needed distance from Lucas, but because she needed nearness to herself. Somehow, after the night they shared, the silence between them had become a space she didn't dread. There was no pressing need to fill it, no games, just air, breathable, honest. She rose early each morning, sketching with a focus she hadn't felt in years. Her lines became bolder, more expressive. She found herself drawing not what she saw, but what she remembered feeling. The curve of a shoulder bathed in half-light. The shape of a mouth paused between confession and restraint. A pair of hands, not reaching to possess, but to offer. By the third evening, she wasn't sure if she was running from something or preparing to return. That question clung to her as she walked through the quiet evening streets, her coat wrapped tight, the wind crisp against her skin. The city felt changed, familiar, but somehow gentler, as if it remembered the version of her who had once cried beneath its rain and now offered her a quieter welcome. She didn't tell Lucas she was coming. The elevator opened into the private corridor, leading to his penthouse. Her heart pounded, steady but low, like a knock behind closed ribs. Her fingers hovered above the keypad momentarily before she tapped in the code he had given her. There had been no ceremony when he shared it. A quiet trust passed between them, as if to say, "This isn't just a door, it's something more." The lock clicked. The door opened. The scent of cedar and something faintly spicy, his cologne perhaps, wrapped around her. The lights were low. From the far end of the room, the soft notes of a piano drifted through the air. She followed the sound. Lucas was seated at the grand piano near the window. He wore a black sweater and charcoal trousers, sleeves pushed to his elbows, fingers moving across the keys with surprising tenderness. Naomi froze just beyond the archway, watching. The piece was simple, melancholic, restrained, but beautiful. He hadn't noticed her yet. She stayed quiet. She wanted to see him as he was when no one was watching. His eyes were closed, and his brow was gently furrowed, as if he were sifting through some memory too delicate to name. The music seemed to come from someplace deeper than skill, from something he hadn't yet spoken aloud. When the final note faded into the quiet, Naomi stepped forward. Lucas turned his head. Surprise flickered in his eyes, but it was quickly eclipsed by something softer. Relief. "You play," she said quietly. He nodded, offering only a faint smile. "Not often." "Why not?" He looked back at the keys, his fingers still resting lightly there. "Because every time I sit down to play, I remember who I used to be, and sometimes it hurts." Naomi didn't speak. He looked at her again. "But tonight, I wanted to remember." They stood like that for a beat. No music, no small talk, just the quiet sound of the city beyond the glass and the space between two people who had begun to mean more than they knew how to explain. Lucas rose and walked toward her. "I didn't expect you. I didn't expect to come," she admitted. "But I realized something." "What?" "I'm not afraid of what this could become. I'm afraid of pretending it's less than it already is." Lucas's breath caught. Naomi stepped closer. "But I need you to understand something. I'm not someone to keep in a corner of your world, waiting, adjusting, making herself smaller to fit into your life." He looked at her, steady, unblinking. "I would never ask that of you." Her voice was calm but firm. "Then don't offer me anything halfway. If you want this, want me, then let it be real." Lucas didn't flinch. "I've never been more certain of anything." Naomi searched his face for hesitation and found none. What she did find, however, was vulnerability. Not weakness, but the kind of exposure that comes from shedding armor. "I don't need grand promises," she said. "I need honesty, and time, and space when I ask for it." "You'll have all of it," he said, voice rough now. She exhaled slowly, then reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "What's this?" he asked, gently taking it from her hand. "My lease notice. I'm not renewing." His eyes widened, but he didn't speak. "I'm not moving in," she added quickly. "This isn't about merging lives. This is about choosing mine." He unfolded the paper and glanced over it, then looked back up. "I want you to stay," he said quietly. "I know," she whispered, "and maybe I will. But not because the roof leaks or the street's too loud. I'll stay because I want to, and only when I know I can stand in this with both feet." Lucas stepped forward, brushing a curl from her cheek. "I'm not asking you to fit into my world. I'm asking if we can build one between us." Naomi's throat tightened. It was everything she'd never dared to hope someone would say. Behind them, the city hummed. The past was still there. Hers and his. Unresolved, complicated, full of echoes and bruises. That may be the point. Love wasn't the absence of pasts. Perhaps it was what people did with them when they collided, how they stitched new space from old wounds and created light from places that had once held only shadow. Naomi rested her forehead against his chest. Lucas exhaled, his arms wrapping around her, slow and steady. No more questions. No more conditions. Just the sound of silence speaking louder than words. And in that silence, two hearts began to write something new. The next few days unfolded with an unexpected gentleness. There were no declarations, no choreographed scenes of devotion, The steady, unhurried movement of two lives began to adjust tentatively and imperfectly to sharing space, even if they hadn't yet named what that space meant. Naomi didn't move in, but she came and went easily, her key card tucked beside her sketch pencils. Some nights, she stayed. Some mornings, she left before sunrise, her curls damp from the shower, lips still warm from his kiss. Lucas never asked her to stay longer than she wanted, and Naomi never asked him to explain what he was thinking when he'd pause in the middle of typing, to look at her like she was something rare and fleeting. They settled into something that felt fragile, but not weak, like new porcelain, thin-walled, translucent, capable of holding light if handled with care. One evening, Naomi sat curled in an armchair by the window, sketchpad resting against her knees, charcoal smudged on her fingertips. Lucas worked at the desk nearby, the glow of his laptop screen casting subtle shadows across his face. Neither spoke, but it wasn't silence for silence's sake. It was comfort. "I keep drawing your hands," Naomi said softly, not looking up. Lucas glanced over. "My hands?" She nodded, turning the page to show him. Several studies, quick sketches, bold lines, some refined into delicate detail. The shape of his fingers resting on piano keys, the back of his hand against a bedsheet. His palm was slightly open, as if mid-offer. "You see things I forget I have," he murmured. "You use your hands like someone who's always trying to fix something," she replied, her voice calm. "Even when there's nothing broken." Lucas stood, crossed the room, and knelt in front of her. He took her stained fingers in his clean ones and turned them over slowly, like he had memorized the lines of her palms. "I don't want to fix you," he said. "I only want to understand you." Naomi's breath caught, not because of the words themselves, but because of how he said them, as if understanding her were not a task, but a privilege. She leaned forward, her lips brushing against his temple. "Then stop looking for the cracks. I'm not a project." "You're not," he agreed, "but you are art." Naomi chuckled, the sound low, almost surprised. "You're dangerous when you talk like that." He looked up at her. "I only say what I mean." That night, they didn't rush toward intimacy. Instead, they unraveled into it, slowly, hands grazing over ribs and shoulders, not for conquest, but for communion. Naomi's body, once a place of silence and caution, began to trust what it meant to be looked at without being claimed. Lucas's touch was reverent, as though he understood that sometimes presence was more intimate than pleasure. Afterward, they lay tangled in soft sheets, bare skin warmed by each other's breath. Naomi rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat beneath his ribs. "Were you always this patient?" she asked. "No," he admitted, "but with you, I don't want to miss anything." She smiled against his skin. Later, when sleep tugged at her and the city outside whispered its lullaby of sirens and wind, Naomi felt something shift, not in the room, not in him, but within herself. For the first time in years, she felt safe, not just in her body, but in her becoming. The next morning, they went out together, not far, just a quiet corner cafe on the west side. Naomi wore a long coat over one of her old dresses, and Lucas, dressed down in jeans and a charcoal wool jacket, looked less like a CEO and more like someone rediscovering the joy of walking nowhere in particular. They shared breakfast. Naomi stole bites from his plate without asking, and Lucas made a face whenever the barista misspelled his name on the cup. They laughed more than they spoke. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like something real. Afterward, Naomi asked to visit a nearby gallery. Her favorite artist had a temporary installation there. Intimate charcoal pieces, raw and layered with meaning. Lucas walked beside her in silence, hands tucked into his pockets, eyes scanning the art with genuine focus. When they reached a sketch of a woman curled inward, her arms wrapped around her knees, Naomi paused. "This one," she murmured. "She's not hiding. She's protecting something." Lucas studied it for a moment. "She looks like you." "She looks like who I was," Naomi said quietly. "Before I knew someone could look at me and not try to solve me." Lucas said nothing. He gently took her hand and laced his fingers through hers. And in that gesture, unremarkable to anyone else, Naomi felt a softness spread through her chest. Not because it was romantic, but because it was real. Because it was steady. Because it asked nothing but her presence. On the walk back, clouds gathered over the skyline, but neither hurried. When the first raindrops began to fall, Lucas opened his coat and pulled her gently inside it. They stood beneath a narrow awning, her head resting beneath his chin, watching the world blur in silver lines. He didn't kiss her. He just held her, quiet and firm. And Naomi, wrapped in his coat, with his breath brushing against her hairline, knew that something in her had changed. She no longer felt like a visitor in someone else's story. She was writing her own. And Lucas, without knowing it, had become a part of her ink. On a late autumn afternoon, Seattle was shrouded in clouds, the faint light softening in the mist. Naomi sat alone by the windowsill in Lucas's apartment. Not exactly sad, but not peaceful either. In her hand was a crumpled piece of silver paper, the edge curled from being folded many times. A handwritten letter from her mother before she passed away. Some things in life never truly disappear. They just become quieter. Lucas entered with a cup of tea, not asking what she was holding. He set the cup beside her and quietly sat down nearby, keeping a respectful distance, close enough to be present, but not intrusive. Naomi didn't look at him. She kept reading the familiar lines, her mother's soft handwriting. "Don't be afraid to be seen, Naomi, even when it feels like too much." A slow sigh escaped her chest, not from pain, but from memory and something more profound: gratitude. "I used to think," Naomi said, her voice barely more than a whisper, "that if I did everything right, worked hard, stayed quiet, didn't cause trouble, I'd be loved. Not because I was special, but because I was safe." Lucas was silent. He didn't interrupt. "But no one loves someone just for being easy," she continued. "People love seeing fear, vulnerability, even the messy parts. And that used to scare me." Lucas looked at her profile, the weak light highlighting her cheekbones, her eyes no longer fixed on the paper, but drifting to a distant memory. "Are you scared?" Naomi suddenly asked him. "When I say I need time, when I leave, when I come back without promises?" Lucas didn't answer immediately. He chose his words carefully, like walking on thin ice. "I am scared," he said softly. "I'm scared you won't come back, but I'm even more scared that you might leave if I love you the right way. And what scares me most is if I don't love you right, I'll lose something I can never have again." Naomi didn't cry, but her eyes softened, deeper now. Some barrier inside her silently melted away. She leaned into his shoulder. "I've never been this patient before," she asked. "No," he admitted. "But with you, I don't want to miss anything." She smiled against his skin. Chapter 2. A week later, Naomi was invited to a small art exhibition at an independent gallery in Belltown. It wasn't a big show, but it was the first time one of her drawings was recognized, hung on white walls under soft yellow lights. She wasn't sure if she wanted Lucas to come, not because she was embarrassed, but because his presence made everything feel real. When Lucas entered the gallery, Naomi stood alone before the sketch, Stillness Before Touch, an abstract charcoal piece depicting a woman with her back turned, hair tied high, bare shoulders facing the light. He stood behind her silently. Naomi knew he was there. "What do you see?" she asked, still looking at the painting. "I see someone learning not to run anymore." She turned, eyes filled with emotion. "And you?" he asked. "What do you see?" Naomi smiled softly, almost self-mockingly. "I see a part of me, a part of my mother, and a part I haven't named yet." Lucas stepped closer, unhurried. "I hope I don't dim those parts," he said. "You don't," Naomi answered. "You just make them dare to shine." In the quiet air of the gallery, among white walls and soft yellow light, they stood together, not touching, but clearly on the same side. Naomi had not promised anything. Lucas had not asked for more. But between them was an unspoken agreement. No signatures, no bindings. A fragile yet enduring trust, like the last light of day. Gentle, slow, but undeniable. The city outside was cloaked in early morning mist. The streets washed clean from the night's rain, glistening under the pale glow of street lamps. Inside Lucas's apartment, the world felt still, soft, and intimate, as if the hours themselves were taking their time, allowing something delicate to grow between two hearts, uncertain but willing. Naomi sat at the small wooden table near the window, warming her hands with steaming tea. Her gaze drifted lazily over the pages of a new sketchbook, the charcoal lying beside it untouched for now. She wasn't thinking about art. Her mind wandered to the spaces between moments, the things left unsaid but profoundly felt. Lucas entered quietly, carrying 2 plates with simple breakfast fare: fresh fruit, crusty bread, and creamy yogurt. He smiled softly when he saw her absorbed in thought. "Morning," he said, setting the plates down gently. Naomi looked up, returning his smile with one of her own, shy and sincere. "Morning." They ate together in a companionable silence that only comes when words feel unnecessary or too fragile. Outside, the city began to stir. The distant hum of cars, footsteps echoing faintly, a dog barking somewhere in a nearby alley. After a while, Lucas leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about last night." Naomi's eyes met his, curious but cautious. "It wasn't just about passion," he continued, voice low and earnest. "It felt like a kind of awakening, for both of us." She nodded slowly, the memory of that night vivid in her chest like a soft fire. It did, but it also left questions. He reached out, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. "I'm here for every question, every uncertainty." Her breath caught, not from surprise, but from the warmth in his words, the kind that feels like an anchor thrown in rough seas. Naomi folded her hands on the table, gathering courage. "I'm afraid of losing myself, of being swallowed up by your world." Lucas's expression softened, understanding folding into his eyes. "I don't want to take anything from you. I want to build something new with you, where neither of us has to lose ourselves." She felt tears prick the edges of her eyelids, not from sadness, but from the weight of being seen, truly seen. "Can we do that?" she whispered. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Only if we're honest, if we're patient, if we listen." Their fingers intertwined naturally, the touch gentle but grounding. Later, they moved to the living room, where sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting soft patterns on the floor. Lucas sat on the couch, patting the space beside him. Naomi hesitated, then sat down, leaning into him as though finding refuge in his steady presence. He began to talk, not about business or plans, but about himself, about the loneliness wrapped inside success, the masks worn in boardrooms and public appearances, how he had learned to hide pieces of himself, fearing vulnerability would be seen as weakness. Naomi listened, the quiet rhythm of his voice weaving through the room like a balm. When he finished, she shared her stories of foster homes and the promises she had made to herself to survive and keep her heart guarded. She spoke of dreams once vibrant, but dimmed by years of struggle. Their stories folded into each other, two fractured pasts, forming a fragile mosaic of shared understanding. As the afternoon light softened to gold, Lucas pulled her close. "I want to learn every part of you," he said. "Not just the surface, but the hidden corners." Naomi looked up, eyes shimmering. "And I want to learn you, beyond the titles, beyond the image." They kissed then, not hurriedly, but with deliberate tenderness, a promise in each touch. The world outside continued its noisy rhythm, but inside, time slowed. Once cautious and guarded, the two souls found courage in each other's arms. Naomi realized that love wasn't about losing herself. It was about choosing to grow together, in a world where neither had to be anything but honest. And in that quiet unfolding, they began to write the first actual lines of their story. Evenings in Seattle carried a softness, a delicate pause between the day's bustle and the night's quiet surrender. The city lights shimmered like scattered stars, reflecting in the rain-slicked streets below Lucas's penthouse window, where Naomi stood alone, wrapped in a shawl that barely kept out the chill. Her thoughts were a tangle of hope, fear, and the weight of unspoken possibilities. The past weeks had unfolded in ways she hadn't imagined. Moments of tenderness, shared silences, and the raw honesty of letting someone see your unguarded self. But beneath the warmth, the reality of their worlds tugged insistently, a reminder that love was rarely free from complication, no matter how pure. Lucas joined her, his presence quiet but unwavering. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining with a familiarity born not of time, but of trust. "I think about us," he finally said, voice low, "about the space we're trying to create." Naomi turned to face him, eyes searching. "It's fragile." He nodded. "Fragile, yes, but real." She sighed, the sound carrying the weight of unspoken worries. "Sometimes I wonder if we're building on solid ground or just sand." Lucas's gaze held hers with unwavering steadiness. "We build together, with patience, with honesty, with the courage to face what's hard." She wanted to believe him. More than that, she wanted to believe in the future they whispered about in quiet moments. But the shadows of doubt crept in, whispers of past hurts, unmet expectations, and a world often judged too harshly. Naomi spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "I fear losing myself, losing who I am." Lucas stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You won't lose yourself. You'll find a new strength that comes from standing beside someone who respects all that you are." Her eyes shimmered, tears threatening but unspilled. "And what if that strength isn't enough?" He smiled softly, a gentle promise in his expression. "Then we'll face it together." They moved to the couch, settling into a comfortable closeness that needed no words. Outside, the city breathed softly, lights twinkling through the mist like distant hopes. Naomi rested her head against Lucas's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. It was a rhythm that grounded her, whispered of safety amid uncertainty. Love wasn't a grand declaration or a flawless promise at that moment. It was a fragile balance, an ongoing choice to trust, grow, and hold on, even when the future remained unclear. And as the night deepened, they embraced the beautiful imperfection of what they had, a beginning written not in certainty, but in the brave vulnerability of two souls willing to risk everything for a chance at togetherness. The first snowfall arrived quietly, like a whispered secret between winter's cold breaths and autumn's fading warmth. Seattle's streets were dusted in soft white, a fragile layer that muted the city's usual clamor, turning everything into a still, hushed world. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Lucas's penthouse, the flakes swirled slowly, dancing in the pale light. Naomi stood by the window, hands tucked into the pockets of her wool coat, breath fogging the glass as she watched the snow settle on the branches of bare trees. Her mind wandered to the conversation from the night before, words spoken in the dim glow of candlelight, a promise quietly made, heavy with meaning, yet delicate as frost on glass. Lucas joined her silently, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. The heat of his body was a sharp contrast to the crisp air, and Naomi leaned back instinctively, resting her head against his shoulder. "Winter changes everything," Lucas murmured, voice low, almost reverent. Naomi smiled softly. "It strips away the noise, leaves only what's real." He turned her gently to face him, eyes searching hers with a vulnerability that made her heart skip. "I want to be real with you, not just now, but always." She looked up, catching the glint of raw sincerity. "And what does that mean?" Lucas hesitated, then breathed as if gathering strength from the quiet between them. "It means no more walls, no more hiding. I want to share my fears, hopes, and the parts I keep locked away." Naomi's eyes shimmered, the edges wet with unshed tears. "That's a lot to ask." He smiled, brushing a loose curl from her face. "It's a promise I'm making, to you and myself." She reached up, tracing the line of his jaw with delicate fingers. "I want to believe in that promise." "Then let me show you," he said, pulling her closer until their foreheads touched. The world outside was white and still, but between them, something stirred, fragile and fierce all at once. It was a beginning, forged not in grand declarations, but in the quiet courage to be seen, known, and loved in all their imperfect truths. As snowflakes settled softly on the city below, Naomi and Lucas embraced the uncertain beauty of their unfolding story. One moment, one breath, one promise at a time. The winter sky was a canvas of soft grays, the horizon barely distinguishable where clouds met the distant waters. Wrapped in its quiet melancholy, Seattle seemed to hold its breath as Naomi stood on the terrace, the cold air biting gently at her cheeks, her breath rising in small, fleeting clouds. Behind her, the apartment hummed softly with the warmth Lucas had kindled, not just from the fire crackling in the hearth, but from the shared moments and fragile trust weaving between them. She wrapped her hands around a warm mug, the steam curling upward, a small comfort in the vast expanse of uncertainty. Her thoughts wandered to the path that had led her here, through literal and metaphorical storms, into a space where she could finally let down the walls she had built so carefully around her heart. There had been fear, yes, hesitation, the persistent tug of self-doubt, but there had also been moments of pure, unexpected grace, moments when Lucas's steady gaze reminded her that vulnerability was not weakness, but a doorway to something profound. She turned as he joined her, silent and sure, his presence a quiet reassurance against the chill. Their fingers met, warm and deliberate, an unspoken conversation passing between them. "I never imagined," Naomi began, voice soft, "that someone could see me. Not just the surface, but all the parts I hide." Lucas squeezed her hand gently. You're more than I ever hoped to find. Her gaze lifted to the horizon, where the first hints of dawn began to blur the edges of night. Maybe this is our beginning, she whispered. Not perfect, not without fear, but real. He smiled, a slow, genuine curve that reached his eyes. Real is all I want. They stood together, watching the city awaken beneath the soft light, the world stretching wide before them, a canvas waiting to be filled with the colors of their shared journey. And in that quiet morning, with the promise of countless tomorrows ahead, Naomi and Lucas took their first steps toward a new horizon. One where love was not a destination, but a path they chose to walk, hand in hand, through all the seasons to come. The city lights twinkled softly against the night sky, their glow reflecting in the quiet waters below like scattered stars brought to rest. Inside the warmth of their shared sanctuary, Naomi and Lucas sat close, the world outside fading into a gentle hum, distant and irrelevant. Their journey had been anything but simple, a tapestry woven with threads of vulnerability, trust, fear, and hope. From the first unexpected encounter in the storm to the fragile moments of honesty that followed, they had discovered something rare, a connection not built on perfection, but on the courage to be seen and loved as they were. Naomi traced a lazy circle on Lucas's hand, feeling the steady pulse beneath her fingertips, a rhythm that had come to mean safety, belonging, and possibility. I never thought love could be like this, she murmured, voice thick with emotion. Not the stories or fairy tales, but the real, messy, beautiful kind. Lucas turned to her, eyes shimmering with a tenderness that words could scarcely capture. It's everything worth fighting for. They spoke little after that, their silence filled with the weight of unspoken promises. Each glance and gentle touch was a vow to stand together through uncertainty, cherish the delicate balance they had found, and nurture the love that had blossomed against all odds. Outside, the city breathed on, unaware of the quiet miracle unfolding within these walls. Naomi leaned into Lucas, her head resting against his chest, her heart beating in time with his. I'm ready, she whispered. Lucas smiled, his lips brushing a soft kiss against her hair. So am I. For all the days, all the storms and mornings we'll face together. And in that embrace, surrounded by the tender glow of shared dreams and the promise of countless tomorrows, they found their forever. If this story touched your heart, please like and share to help more souls discover the beauty of genuine love. Leave a comment below with your favorite moment from Naomi and Lucas's journey. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more heartfelt stories, celebrating the courage it takes to love and be loved truly. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.